Power is an illusion. Democracy? A carefully crafted lie. And the man sitting behind the most powerful desk in the world never truly had control. It started with a single moment, a late-night meeting, a collapsing president, and a whisper of something far worse than a conspiracy. Ethan Hawthorne was never supposed to uncover the truth, but once he did, there was no turning back. The walls of the White House held secrets older than the country itself, and someone was willing to kill to keep them buried. With enemies lurking in every shadow and allies falling like dominoes, Ethan has one choice: expose the truth or die with it. The war for power isn't coming, it's already here. The air in the Oval Office was thick with tension as President James Caldwell sat behind the resolute desk, listening intently to his advisors. The meeting had stretched late into the night, with heated discussions about classified intelligence reports on domestic security threats. Ethan Hawthorne, his chief of staff, observed his boss closely. Caldwell looked exhausted, his usual sharp presence dulled by fatigue. Then, mid-sentence, the president's hands clenched, his breath hitched, and suddenly, his body convulsed. His coffee cup toppled onto the floor as he collapsed forward, his head striking the desk with a sickening thud. Panic surged through the room as his advisors leaped to their feet. Secret Service agents stormed in, guns drawn, before realizing what had happened. "Get the medical team, now!" one barked into his radio. Ethan, frozen in shock, watched as Caldwell's body trembled violently before going still. The medical team rushed in, their frantic attempts at resuscitation filling the room with the cold, clinical sound of defibrillators. Ethan's heart pounded as he backed away, his mind screaming that something was terribly wrong. A heart attack? It didn't add up. Caldwell had passed his physical just weeks ago with perfect health. But as he looked around the room, he caught sight of Vice President Malcolm Reed, standing unnervingly still, hands folded behind his back, watching. No panic, no concern, just a measured gaze. And in that moment, Ethan knew this wasn't an accident. The official statement released to the press declared that the president had suffered a sudden cardiac event and was being treated at Walter Reed Medical Center. But Ethan wasn't convinced. As he made his way back to the White House, his gut told him that Caldwell's collapse was something far more deliberate. His suspicions were confirmed. The moment he arrived, armed security had doubled, and to his disbelief, his personal security clearance had been temporarily revoked. The Oval Office, now a sealed-off crime scene, was swarming with intelligence operatives rifling through documents, erasing traces of classified reports, as though an invisible hand was scrubbing history clean. When he confronted the head of security, he was met with an icy stare. "National security measures are in effect," the man repeated like a machine. Then, as if on cue, Ethan's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. A simple text, an address, and 2 words that made his blood run cold. Not natural. With no one he could trust inside the White House, Ethan had no choice but to follow the only lead he had. The meeting place was a desolate underground parking garage, the kind where secrets were traded in hushed voices under flickering lights. Ethan parked a few levels down and proceeded cautiously. He scanned the area, every shadow now a potential threat. The figure waiting for him was draped in a dark hoodie, barely visible in the dim light. But before Ethan could get within earshot, the first shot rang out. Instinct took over. He dropped to the ground as a sniper round shattered the pavement inches from his head. Scrambling for cover behind a pillar, his mind raced. Who else knew he was here? The contact, whoever they were, was the real target. Another shot rang out, and this time it found its mark. The hooded figure jerked forward, collapsing onto the concrete with a dull thud. Ethan sprinted toward the body, adrenaline overpowering reason. The dying man gasped, reaching up to grab Ethan's collar, his breath ragged. "They know you're here," he choked out, pressing something into Ethan's palm, a blood-stained key card with the words "West Wing Restricted Access" printed on it. Then, before he could say more, his body slackened, lifeless. Ethan barely had a second to process before the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He turned just in time to see a dark SUV speeding towards him. He had to move. Now, Ethan knew that returning to the White House was a risk, but he also knew he had no choice. Armed with the stolen keycard, he slipped through the lower-level staff entrance in the dead of night, using the underground access corridors to avoid the main security checkpoints. He had never been inside the West Wing restricted archives. He hadn't even known they existed, but as he swiped the keycard and the heavy steel door slid open with a mechanical hiss, a chill ran through him. The room wasn't just an archive, it was a command center. Walls lined with classified files, confidential briefings, and encrypted communications. His eyes scanned the shelves until he found it, a folder labeled Sovereign Initiative. Inside were documents outlining unsigned executive orders, directives that, if carried out, would shift the balance of power in a way that didn't just suggest a coup, it confirmed it. Covert military movements, changes in financial structures, secret transfer of assets. The fingerprints of an operation designed to seize control from the inside. But the final page sent a chill through Ethan's bones. An activity log showing one name consistently accessing these files in secret. Vice President Malcolm Reed. Reed had always been a calculated politician known for his measured rhetoric and unwavering loyalty, or so everyone thought. The message Ethan intercepted from a hidden White House server changed everything. The transition is ahead of schedule. Caldwell will not recover. Be ready. It was a clear indicator that Reed was expecting the presidency to be handed to him. This wasn't just political opportunism. He was in on it. Ethan quickly backed up the files onto a flash drive, knowing this was his only chance to expose what was happening. But just as he secured the drive in his jacket, a cold voice echoed behind him. "You should have left this alone, Ethan." His breath hitched. Slowly, he turned to see a small group of armed security operatives standing at the entrance, weapons trained on him. The lead agent stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Come quietly," he ordered. "Or don't. Either way, you won't be leaving here with that drive." Ethan's mind raced. His only options? Fight or disappear. Ethan's muscles coiled as the armed men advanced, their weapons steady, their intentions clear. He had seconds to act. His eyes darted around the archive room, limited cover, only one exit, and a vent shaft too small to squeeze through. His mind raced through possible outcomes, but the weight of the flash drive in his jacket reminded him why he couldn't be taken. Without hesitation, he lunged sideways, grabbing a metal file cabinet and yanking it down to create a barrier. The moment it crashed against the floor, he was already moving, ducking under the agent's gunfire and barreling toward the door. A sharp pain seared through his arm, a grazing shot. He ignored it, adrenaline taking over, and slammed into one of the men, driving his elbow into his throat. The agent crumpled, choking, but the others were still on him. More shots rang out, shattering overhead lights, plunging the room into flickering darkness. Ethan sprinted into the corridor, hearing shouts behind him as the alarm blared through the White House underground. He reached the nearest stairwell and ascended 3 steps at a time, knowing that every exit would be locked down within minutes. His only chance was the underground parking structure, where the president's armored fleet was kept. But before he could reach it, he felt the air shift. A sudden blow to the side of his head sent him sprawling to the floor. The world spun as he looked up, vision blurring, only to see a figure in a black suit standing over him, calm and composed. "You always were a problem, Ethan," the man said with a smirk, before slamming a boot into his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. As darkness swallowed him, he heard the last words he'd ever expect. "The agency will take it from here." Ethan's consciousness drifted between black voids and muffled voices. The cold sensation of metal against his skin brought him back to reality. His arms were bound, his body slumped in the trunk of a moving vehicle, the distinct hum of an unmarked SUV vibrating through his skull. His instincts told him one thing: this wasn't standard White House security. The men who had taken him weren't Secret Service. They weren't even part of the Vice President's private security detail. This was something else. His mind sharpened as he fought through the pain, recalling the last words he heard. The agency. The realization sent a chill down his spine. CIA. But why? The White House power struggle was one thing, But if the CIA was involved, that meant whatever was happening was bigger than a coup. It was a full-scale covert operation. His fingers worked frantically against the zip ties binding his wrists, but whoever had done this knew what they were doing. The ties were reinforced, cutting deep into his skin. He needed to think fast. The SUV made a sharp turn, and a faint beeping sound from the dashboard suggested a checkpoint ahead. That was his window. With his head pressed against the floor of the trunk, he forced his body into an awkward position and used his legs to kick against the inner panel. Once, twice, then a third time until the emergency latch popped. The trunk cracked open just as the SUV slowed down. Ethan didn't hesitate. He rolled out, hitting the asphalt hard and tumbling onto the side of the road as horns blared behind him. The moment he hit the ground, he forced himself up despite the pain and sprinted toward the nearest alleyway before his captors could react. The shouts behind him faded as he disappeared into the maze of Washington, D.C.'s back streets. He needed help, someone who could hide him from both the White House and the agency. There was only one person who could pull that off: Lauren Decker, an ex-NSA hacker who had spent the last 5 years off-grid after exposing a black market intelligence ring inside the Pentagon. If anyone could decrypt the stolen files and find out why the CIA was involved, it was her. The safe house was tucked in a forgotten part of the city, an abandoned industrial complex filled with rusting machinery and shadows deep enough to make men disappear. Ethan pressed the buzzer 3 times in rapid succession, the coded signal. A red light flickered before the door creaked open, just enough for him to see the barrel of a shotgun pointed directly at his face. Lauren never trusted easy. "Jesus, Ethan," she muttered as she pulled him inside, locking the door behind them. He could tell from her expression that she had already heard the news about Caldwell. "You look like you crawled out of your own grave." "Feels like it," he muttered, pulling the flash drive from his jacket and sliding it across the table. "I need to know what's on this. Fast." Lauren sighed, running a hand through her cropped hair before plugging the drive into her isolated system. The screen filled with encrypted files, a mess of government seals, blacked-out text, and signatures of men who didn't officially exist. The moment she began bypassing the security layers, a warning flashed on the screen. "Secure server breach detected. Alerting primary handler." "Shit," Lauren whispered. "Someone knows you took this." Ethan leaned in. "Can you stop the trace?" "I can slow it down, but not forever. Whatever's on this thing is serious." She continued working, fingers flying over the keyboard. Then, as the last layer of encryption fell, her face paled. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his pulse pounding. Lauren turned to him, the glow of the monitor illuminating the fear in her eyes. "This isn't just about Caldwell. This is about control. The CIA wasn't just watching the White House. They were engineering it." She clicked on a file titled Project Sovereign, and a string of classified orders filled the screen. They weren't just about removing the president. They were about who would replace him, how policies would be dictated, and how key government branches were being infiltrated at every level. They weren't planning a coup, Ethan realized, his stomach twisting in horror. They were running the government from the inside. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. "And now that we know, they'll never let us leave this room alive." Lauren's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing. "Ethan, we have less than 5 minutes before they triangulate our location," she said, her voice steady but tense. "Once the agency knows where we are, we're dead." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his pulse hammering. The files on Project Sovereign weren't just evidence of a coup. They were blueprints for an entire hidden government, run not by elected officials, but by undercover agents embedded deep within Washington's highest offices. CIA assets, strategically placed inside the State Department, Defense, Treasury, and even Congress. These weren't just informants, they were the decision makers. Ethan grabbed a burner phone from the table and dialed a secure number. "We need to disappear," he said as soon as the line connected. On the other end, a deep voice sighed. "You always bring me the worst kind of problems." Ethan smirked despite himself. Daniel Mercer, a former deep-cover CIA operative, had once been Ethan's handler before going rogue. If anyone knew how to slip beneath the intelligence radar, it was Mercer. "Meet me at the Potomac docks in an hour," Mercer said before the line cut off. Lauren shut the laptop and stuffed the flash drive into her pocket. We have to go. Now. The two of them sprinted through the industrial complex, heading toward the alley where Ethan had parked his stolen car. But the moment they stepped outside, a sleek black town car blocked the exit. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a crisp navy suit stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks with eerie precision. A diplomat. Or at least, that's what he wanted them to think. "Mr. Hawthorne," the man said with a diplomatic smile, "let's not make this difficult." He gestured, and the car doors opened. Two men in tactical suits, weapons holstered but visible, stepped out. CIA counter. Surveillance. This wasn't an arrest. It was an extraction. Ethan's mind worked fast. If they were here, it meant someone high up wanted Project Sovereign buried fast. No trial, no media, just a silent disappearance. "You think I don't know what you are?" Ethan said, stepping forward. "You're not with the embassy. Your agency deep cover." The so-called diplomat chuckled. "You have no idea how deep this goes," he said, "and you won't live long enough to find out." Then the gunshots erupted. Lauren dove behind a stack of crates as bullets tore through the alley, shattering glass and ricocheting off metal beams. Ethan spun, drawing his sidearm and firing two quick rounds. One struck a CIA operative in the shoulder, sending him reeling, while the other grazed the diplomat's arm, tearing his tailored suit. "Bad move," the diplomat growled, reaching inside his jacket. But before he could pull his weapon, a black motorcycle roared into the alleyway, the rider unloading a silenced SMG with deadly precision. The remaining agents dropped instantly. Ethan barely had time to process before the rider skidded to a stop and lifted the visor. "Mercer, get on," he barked. Ethan and Lauren didn't hesitate. They hopped onto the bike, and within seconds, they were weaving through the dim streets of DC, sirens wailing in the distance. "I told you to meet me at the docks," Mercer grumbled. "Instead, I find you making friends with diplomatic assassins." Ethan smirked. "They shot first." Mercer didn't laugh. "You just declared war against people who don't officially exist. That diplomat? He's station chief of the CIA's Black Ops division. You've pissed off the people who run this country from the shadows." Lauren's grip tightened around Ethan's waist. "We're already dead, aren't we?" Mercer took a sharp turn, nearly throwing them off the bike. "Not if we move fast," he said. "You need to leave DC now, but first, we need leverage, someone inside Project Sovereign who's willing to turn." Ethan's mind raced. They needed an insider, someone on the inside who knew how to bring the entire thing down. He thought back to the files, to a name that had appeared more than once: Ambassador Elise Navarro, a high-ranking diplomat with connections deep in international intelligence networks. If anyone could expose this conspiracy from within, it was her. Mercer nodded. "Good choice. But if she's involved in this, she's already being watched. We need to get to her before they do." Lauren checked her laptop, already running an encrypted search. "She's in Geneva for a United Nations summit. If we're going to talk to her, we're leaving the country." Mercer gunned the throttle. "Then we better hurry. Because I guarantee you, the agency is already on a plane to Switzerland." Mercer had fake passports, burner phones, and a flight booked in under 20 minutes. He hadn't lost his touch. The three of them boarded a private jet under diplomatic clearance, avoiding the usual TSA checkpoints. Lauren's face was pale as she studied the files on her laptop. If these documents are right, Project Sovereign isn't just an American operation. There are foreign diplomats and intelligence agencies involved, high-ranking officials from Russia, China, the UK, even NATO. Ethan leaned over. "They're all compromised?" She shook her head. "More than that, they're complicit." That changed everything. This wasn't just a deep state operation inside the US government. It was a global intelligence alliance, an underground power structure where world leaders were installed and removed like chess pieces. The President of the United States was just one move in a much larger game. Mercer poured himself a drink unconcerned. "This is how the world actually works," he muttered. "Presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, they're just the faces people see. The real power lies beneath. And you just pulled back the curtain." Ethan exhaled sharply. "If we expose this, it won't just take down a few politicians. It will take down governments. Lauren closed the laptop. Then we better get to Navarro before the agency does. Because if she's on their side, we won't make it out of Geneva alive. The jet hummed as it cut through the night sky, but Ethan knew there would be no rest. As they neared Switzerland, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about saving the presidency anymore. This was about saving the entire world from an invisible government that had existed for decades. And they were about to declare war on it. The flight to Geneva was tense, each of them running through possible scenarios of how this would unfold. Ambassador Elise Navarro had been a respected diplomat for years, known for her shrewd negotiation skills and extensive ties across intelligence circles. If she was part of Project Sovereign, they were walking into a trap. If she wasn't, she might be the only person who could help them blow the entire operation open. As the plane touched down at a private airstrip outside Geneva, Mercer handed Ethan and Lauren forged diplomatic credentials, allowing them to move under the guise of observers for an economic summit. The moment they set foot outside, 2 black sedans were already waiting. "Not ours," Mercer muttered. Before they could react, the doors opened, and a woman in a sleek black suit stepped out, flanked by Swiss intelligence officers. Elise Navarro herself. "I expected you sooner," she said calmly. "Get in." Ethan exchanged glances with Mercer and Lauren before sliding into the car. The interior was soundproofed, the windows tinted. Elise sat across from them, her expression unreadable. "Before you ask," she said, "yes, I know about Project Sovereign, and no, I'm not part of it." She handed Ethan a tablet with documents already open. "But I also know that if you're here, you're being hunted. The CIA already has operatives in Geneva." Lauren's fingers hovered over her laptop. "If you're not part of this, why haven't they silenced you?" Elise's lips curled into a grim smile. "Because I haven't made a move yet, but I've been waiting for someone who would." Then she tapped the tablet, revealing something that made Ethan's stomach drop. Project Sovereign is moving into Phase 2. The president isn't dying fast enough. They're planning a direct assassination attempt, and the vice president will declare a state of emergency within hours. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. They were accelerating the plan. If the president didn't die naturally, they'd make sure he did, and it would happen tonight. "Who's carrying out the hit?" he asked. Elise's face darkened. "A covert team from the CIA's clandestine operations unit. They have full diplomatic immunity, and they're already in place." She handed Mercer another file. "They'll be using an assassination protocol called Iron Tide, a method designed to mimic a fatal embolism. No trace, no autopsy." Lauren's fingers danced across her laptop. "If I can intercept their comms, I might be able to delay them, but..." She trailed off, looking at Ethan. "We need to stop them physically," Ethan finished. Elise nodded. "The hit is happening at a Swiss medical facility under heavy protection. We only have one shot at stopping this." Ethan turned to Mercer. "You still have that contact in Interpol?" Mercer grinned. "Let's crash an assassination party." The plan was insane, but it was their only shot. Disguised as Interpol agents, Ethan, Mercer, and Lauren gained access to the private medical suite where the president was being kept under watch. The Swiss government had no idea an assassination was about to take place. As they entered the secure floor, Mercer's comms crackled. "The kill team is moving in." Ethan tensed. If the CIA was this close, they had already infiltrated security. Then all hell broke loose. 4 men in medical attire burst into the room, silenced weapons raised. Ethan moved first, shoving a hospital cart into the lead assassin before disarming him with a brutal strike. Mercer pulled his sidearm, firing 2 clean shots that took down another operative. Lauren ducked behind the hospital bed, throwing a tablet at one of the assassins, giving Ethan enough time to grab the man's gun and put him down. But the 4th killer was already at the president's bedside, a needle filled with a deadly embolism-inducing agent pressed against Caldwell's IV line. "Drop it!" Ethan barked, gun trained on the man's head. The assassin didn't even flinch. "You don't understand," he said with eerie calm. "This has already begun. Killing me won't stop it." Then, before Ethan could react, the assassin injected himself with the poison instead, His body seized for a moment before he collapsed, dead in seconds. Mercer swore under his breath. That was a failsafe. Lauren stared at the lifeless agent. If he was willing to die rather than be captured, it means Project Sovereign still has a plan. The president was still alive, but Ethan knew this was far from over. The assassins were only a distraction. The real coup was happening elsewhere. Lauren hacked into the CIA's encrypted network, and her face went pale. Ethan, they don't need Caldwell to die anymore. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Lauren turned the screen toward him. A presidential executive order had already been forged, one that would grant full military authority to the vice president, citing an ongoing terrorist threat inside the U.S. Within hours, martial law would be declared, and anyone who resisted would be eliminated. They knew we'd stop the assassination attempt, Elise said darkly, so they changed the plan. Now it doesn't matter if Caldwell lives. Reed is going to seize control anyway. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't just about stopping a hit anymore. This was about stopping a full takeover of the U.S. government. Mercer checked his watch. We have 2 hours before this goes into effect, which means we have 2 hours to prove to the world that this was a setup. Lauren bit her lip. Then we need to go public. Elise raised an eyebrow. With what proof? Lauren's fingers flew across the keyboard. With everything. She turned the screen to show a live stream broadcast uploading to every major news network in the world. All the files, the names, the orders, the proof of Project Sovereign's existence. We just blew the entire operation wide open, Ethan said. And now, every intelligence agency on the planet is watching. Mercer chuckled. They're going to come for us. Ethan nodded. Then let's make it worth their while. As the files went live, the world shifted. Project Sovereign was exposed. The power players behind the coup would have nowhere to hide. But Ethan knew one thing for certain. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The world was on fire. The moment Lauren uploaded the files, exposing Project Sovereign to every intelligence agency, government, and media outlet in the world, the equilibrium of power shattered. News anchors struggled to explain the leaks in real time. Social media exploded with the shocking revelations, and global intelligence communities scrambled to verify the impossible truth. The United States government had been infiltrated from within, controlled by a hidden power structure that had dictated policy for decades. But there was no time to celebrate. Within minutes, the vice president declared the leaks a coordinated cyber-terrorist attack, blaming Ethan and his team. The White House branded them as traitors, ordering their immediate capture or elimination. Security forces around the world were issued shoot-on-sight orders. Airports were locked down. Safe houses were raided. The hunt for Ethan Hawthorne had begun. Ethan knew he had one last play before they were wiped off the board. They had to reach President Caldwell before the vice president could fully take control. The president was still in Geneva, recovering from the failed assassination attempt, but his life expectancy had shortened significantly now that the world knew the truth. If they could get to him, they could force him to speak out against Reed, to confirm that the leaked documents were real. But they weren't the only ones racing toward him. Mercer had secured an Interpol transport disguised as a medical convoy to get them to the facility. As they weaved through the chaotic streets of Geneva, radio chatter filled the comms. Swiss security forces have been ordered to detain any unauthorized personnel near the hospital. CIA Black Ops unit en route. Arrival in 15 minutes, confirming multiple undercover agents already inside the facility. It wasn't just a lockdown. The agency had taken over. Ethan turned to Lauren. Can you override hospital security? Lock down the president's floor before they reach him? Lauren nodded, typing furiously into her tablet. I can buy us time, but not much. Mercer checked his gun. Then we make this quick. The moment they entered the hospital, the silence told Ethan everything he needed to know. The staff had already been evacuated. Every hallway was eerily empty, save for the occasional flickering light. Then he saw them. 3 men in suits, earpieces in, standing guard outside the ICU. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired first, 2 quick shots dropping the first agent. Mercer moved next, tackling another into the glass window. The third tried to reach for his gun, but Lauren took him down with a single shot from her silencer. They moved fast. Inside the ICU, President Caldwell lay in bed, looking weak but alive. His eyes flickered open as they entered, and when he saw Ethan, something like understanding flashed across his face. "I knew it," he rasped. "Reed?" "No time," Ethan said. "We have to get you out of here." But before they could move, the doors behind them burst open. Vice President Malcolm Reed stood there in his tailored suit, flanked by a team of heavily armed CIA operatives. His expression was unreadable, cold, calculating. But when he spoke, it was with absolute certainty. "This is where it ends, Ethan." The room tensed. Lauren's hand hovered over her gun. Mercer shifted his stance, preparing for the inevitable, but Ethan knew the truth. There was no way out of this. Reed sighed, stepping forward as his men surrounded them. "You think you've won? You think exposing the truth changes anything?" He gestured vaguely. "Look outside. The world isn't panicking. They're waiting to be told what to believe. And when I walk out of here as the president, they'll believe what I tell them." Ethan shook his head. "You won't get that chance." Then he moved. Before Reed could react, Ethan grabbed a scalpel from the medical tray and lunged. He drove the blade straight into Reed's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a grunt of pain. The room exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted. Mercer tackled one of the agents, struggling for control of a rifle. Lauren dropped two operatives with precise shots, ducking as bullets tore through the room. Ethan went for Reed again, but this time, the vice president was ready. A single shot rang out. Pain erupted in Ethan's chest. He staggered back, his vision swimming. The bullet had hit his ribs, near his heart. He collapsed against the hospital bed, gripping the wound as warmth spread across his hands. Mercer shouted something, but Ethan barely heard it. His vision blurred as he saw President Caldwell struggling to sit up. The old man's face was pale, but his hand gripped something, a syringe from his full. Then, in a final act of defiance, Caldwell slammed the needle into his own neck, injecting the poison meant for him. Reed's face twisted in horror as the president seized violently, then fell still. There would be no declaration of emergency, no transition of power, no coup. The president was gone. Reed turned, fury in his eyes. Kill them all. The last thing Ethan saw was Mercer dragging Lauren toward the door, laying down, covering fire as more agents flooded the room. A second shot tore through Ethan's abdomen. His legs buckled. He fell to his knees. This was it. But as his vision faded, he saw something that made him smile. Lauren had taken the laptop. She was still broadcasting. The world had seen everything. Even if he died here, even if they never made it out alive, they had exposed it all. The world knew. The shadows were burning. And with that, Ethan Hawthorne took his final breath. 3 weeks later, the United States was still in turmoil. The vice president had assumed power, but the leaks had changed everything. Lauren and Mercer were still out there, somewhere, fugitives, survivors. The world had seen what lay beneath the surface. And though Ethan Hawthorne was dead, his legacy would never be erased. Because the truth was out, and the war was far from over.